What if the most dangerous thing about you isn't your temper, but your belief that you can't control it? Most people treat their emotions like weather. Something that happens to them. You get angry the way it rains, suddenly, without permission, and often at the worst possible moment. You spiral into anxiety before a big decision. You freeze when fear shows up. You say things you regret. And then, after the storm passes, you shake your head and tell yourself, "That's just how I am." Miyamoto Musashi would have found that excuse not just weak, but fatal. Musashi was a Japanese swordsman who lived from 1584 to 1645. He fought his first duel at 13 years old and killed his opponent. Over the course of his life, he fought more than 60 duels, against single opponents, against schools of fighters, against men who had trained their entire lives to be the best, and he never lost once. Not a single time. He died at 61, not from violence, but from illness, having spent his final years alone in a cave writing down everything he had learned. What he left behind wasn't just a manual for fighting. It was a complete philosophy of the mind. His two most famous works, the Book of Five Rings and the Dokkodo, read less like ancient texts and more like a cold bucket of water thrown directly at the part of your brain that makes excuses. Musashi had seen what emotion did to men in combat. He had watched skilled, trained, physically superior fighters destroy themselves from the inside out, not because they were outmatched in skill, but because they were outmatched in self-mastery. Fear made them hesitate. Anger made them reckless. Pride made them predictable. And predictability, in Musashi's world, was a death sentence. Here is what he figured out, and what we can still use today. The first lesson: your emotions are not you. The foundational error almost every person makes is the same one Musashi spent his life correcting. The belief that your emotional state is your identity. When you are angry, you say, "I am angry," not "anger is passing through me." When you are afraid, you say, "I am scared," not "fear has arisen in my body." This grammatical habit is not just imprecise. It is a trap. The moment you identify with an emotion, you surrender control of it. It now pilots you. Musashi's approach to the mind was built on a concept he called Heijoshin, ordinary mind, or the mind of everyday calm. The idea is deceptively simple. The state of mind you want in a duel is the exact same state of mind you carry while doing everything else. Eating rice. Sharpening a sword. Walking to the market. Not heightened. Not suppressed. Ordinary. Most people do the opposite. They treat high-stakes moments as exceptions, special circumstances that justify an emotional override. The promotion interview. The difficult conversation with a partner. The business negotiation. "Of course I was nervous," they say. "It was important." But Musashi would push back hard on this. The importance of a moment is not a reason to abandon your center. It is precisely why you cannot afford to. In the Book of Five Rings, he writes about the danger of what he calls a disturbed spirit, a mind that has been knocked off its natural resting state by external events. A disturbed spirit, he says, makes you slow. Not physically slow, but perceptually slow. You stop seeing things as they are and start seeing them through the filter of your emotional state. The angry man sees threats everywhere. The fearful man sees reasons to retreat. The prideful man sees opportunities to perform. None of them are seeing clearly. None of them are responding to reality. They are responding to their own inner noise and calling it perception. The practice, then, is to notice the gap between stimulus and response. To catch yourself in the half-second between something happening and your emotional reaction to it. That gap is where Musashi lived. That gap is where all real self-mastery happens. The second lesson: detachment is not coldness. One of the most common misreadings of Musashi, and of Stoic philosophy in general, is that emotional control means emotional absence. that the goal is to become a machine, to feel nothing, to be cold, disconnected, indifferent to people and outcomes and the texture of life. This is completely wrong, and it matters to get it right. Musashi was not an emotionless automaton. He was a painter of extraordinary sensitivity. He wrote poetry. He carved wood sculptures. He had deep friendships and a profound love of nature. His Dokkodo, the 21 precepts he wrote 9 days before his death, is soaked in a melancholy that only a man who has felt deeply could produce. He was not cold. He was free. The distinction is critical. Coldness is a defense mechanism, a wall you build around feeling because feeling has hurt you. Detachment, in the Musashi sense, is something entirely different. It is the ability to let experience move through you without taking up permanent residence. To feel fully and then to release fully. To be present to emotion without being captured by it. Think of a river. Debris floats through constantly, leaves, branches, the occasional piece of rubbish. A river does not stop flowing because debris has appeared. It does not try to hold the debris in place, examine it obsessively, and build its identity around what floats through it. It flows. The debris moves on. Your mind, Musashi is telling you, should work the same way. Emotion is not the enemy. Attachment to emotion is the enemy. The man who becomes attached to his anger and feeds it, nurses it, constructs elaborate narratives to justify it, that man is not passionate. He is imprisoned. The woman who cannot let go of fear because she has fused her sense of self-protection to it, she is not cautious. She is paralyzed. His first precept in the Dokkodo reads, "Accept everything just as it occurs." This is the whole game, wrapped in 7 words. Not fight what occurs. Not approve of what occurs. Not pretend to feel nothing about what occurs. Accept it. See it clearly. And from that clear seeing, decide what to do next. The third lesson, prepare before the storm hits. Musashi's most famous duel was against Sasaki Kojiro, his great rival. Kojiro was technically brilliant, arguably the superior swordsman in terms of raw skill. He had developed a legendary technique called the swallow cut, a strike so fast it was said to be unblockable. He had spent his entire life in devoted, obsessive preparation for combat. By every measurable standard, Musashi should not have won. But Musashi arrived hours late to the appointed island, forcing Kojiro to wait in the sun, his excitement curdling into fury. By the time Musashi stepped off the boat, having napped during the crossing, famously, Kojiro was shaking with rage. He screamed at Musashi for his tardiness. He was already defeated. Musashi finished the job in a single strike. People often read this story as a trick. Clever psychological manipulation. But that misses the point. Musashi was not manufacturing conditions to destabilize his opponent. He was demonstrating a principle. The man who cannot control his waiting cannot control his fighting. Emotional regulation is not a switch you flip when the moment demands it. It is a capacity you build in advance, through daily practice, until it becomes your default setting. This is the piece that modern audiences most often want to skip. Everyone wants the technique, the breathing exercise, the cognitive reframe, the mindfulness hack. Nobody wants to hear that the real answer is a years-long commitment to cultivating a different relationship with your own mind. Musashi trained relentlessly, yes, but not just swordsmanship. He practiced what we might now call presence. He would sit with discomfort. He lived as an ascetic for extended periods, deliberately denying himself pleasures and conveniences not as punishment but as training. The Dokkodo reflects this. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Be indifferent to where you live. Do not act following customary beliefs. These are not the rules of a man who hated pleasure. They are the disciplines of a man who refused to let pleasure, or its absence, determine his internal state. The practical translation for modern life is this: you do not get good at controlling your emotions during the crisis. You get good at it every single day, in small moments where the stakes feel low. The way you respond when someone cuts you off in traffic. The way you handle a minor frustration at work. The way you sit with a moment of boredom instead of immediately reaching for your phone. Every one of these is a small duel. Every one of them is practice. The fourth lesson: see things as they are, not as you fear them. In the Book of Five Rings, Musashi introduces a concept that translates roughly as the gaze that sees far and wide. He contrasts two types of looking: ken, the sharp, focused, surface gaze, and ken, the broader, softer, more penetrating vision that takes in everything without fixating on any single thing. In combat, a swordsman fixated on his opponent's blade is already in trouble. He sees what he expects to see, not what is actually happening. His narrow focus becomes a blind spot. The skilled fighter, Musashi says, uses ken. He sees the whole picture, the whole body, the whole rhythm of the encounter. He is not reacting to what he fears might happen. He is perceiving what is actually unfolding. This is exactly how emotion distorts perception. Fear narrows the gaze. When you are afraid, you do not see the whole situation. You see the parts that confirm the threat. Your brain, running its threat detection software at full speed, filters out information that doesn't fit the danger narrative and amplifies everything that does. The result is that you respond to a mental projection, a story your nervous system has constructed, rather than to reality. Musashi's prescription is to consciously soften your gaze. To pull back from the immediate stimulus, the angry email, the critical comment, the bad news, and take in the wider picture. What is actually happening here? What do I actually know versus what am I assuming? What would this look like to someone who wasn't inside my head right now? This is not denial. This is not toxic positivity. It is the deliberate exercise of perceptual discipline, choosing to see clearly over choosing to see emotionally. It is extraordinarily difficult to do in the heat of a moment, which is why Musashi's emphasis on daily practice matters so much. The wider gaze is a muscle. You build it through use. The fifth lesson: do not seek validation. Do not fear judgment. The Dokkodo is relentless on this point. Do not seek to be comfortable all the time. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Never be jealous. Never let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. Read together. These precepts paint a portrait of a man who had entirely severed his emotional well-being from the opinions and judgments of other people. This is not arrogance. Musashi was by all accounts deeply humble in the genuine sense, always studying, always questioning, never resting on his reputation. It is something more radical, complete independence from external validation. Most emotional suffering, if you trace it back far enough, is rooted in the gap between how we want to be perceived and how we fear we are perceived. The anxiety before a presentation is not really about the presentation. It is about being judged, found lacking, thought less of. The rage when someone disrespects you is not really about what they said. It is about the threat to the image you need others to hold of you. The grief of rejection is not just the loss of a person. It is the story you tell yourself about what their leaving says about your worth. Musashi spent decades alone. He wandered. He had no permanent home, no fixed identity, no social standing to protect. He was free in a way that most people never allow themselves to be, because most people have constructed elaborate external scaffolding, reputation, approval, status, to hold their inner world in place. The moment any of that scaffolding is threatened, the whole inner world trembles. Musashi collapsed the scaffolding deliberately. He decided that his value was not up for debate and was not determined by anyone else's verdict. This is not about not caring what people think in the shallow, defensive sense. It is about locating the source of your self-assessment so firmly inside yourself that external judgments, positive or negative, simply cannot move the foundation. The practical implication: the next time you feel a powerful emotion, ask yourself honestly whether it is about what is happening or about what it means for how you are seen. If it is the latter, you have found the real work. The sixth lesson: become comfortable with uncertainty. One of the most striking things about the Dokkodo is how many of its precepts are essentially instructions for sitting with not knowing. Do not regret what you have done. Do not be afraid of dying. These are not the words of a man who had answers to everything. They are the words of a man who had made peace with not having answers. Most emotional dysregulation, most anxiety, most obsessive thinking, most emotional reactivity is fundamentally a protest against uncertainty. We want to know how things will turn out. We want guarantees. We want the future to behave itself. And when it refuses, which it always does, we panic, we rage, we collapse. Musashi's life was the extreme case of living with uncertainty. Every duel could have been his last. Every new city, every new school of fighters, every new set of rules and customs, all of it was unknown, uncontrollable, unpredictable. And yet he moved through it all with what witnesses described as an almost inhuman calm. Not because he had figured out the future, because he had stopped requiring the future to be figured out before he could function in the present. This is, perhaps, the hardest of his lessons for modern people to absorb. We live in a world that has built entire industries around the promise of reducing uncertainty. Insurance, planning apps, financial forecasting, weather apps, GPS. We are surrounded by the illusion that uncertainty can be engineered away if you just have the right tools and enough information. It cannot. And every time we are reminded of this, every time something happens that we did not see coming, the emotional hit is worse for all the false certainty we had built up around ourselves. Musashi's practice was to stand inside the uncertainty and find that it was survivable. To walk to the duel not knowing whether he would walk back, and to discover that this not knowing did not have to destroy him before the fight even began. The emotion, fear, in its rawest form, was present. He felt it. He simply did not let it make decisions on his behalf. The integration, what this actually looks like in practice. Musashi is not recommending a life of suppression, rigid self-denial, or emotional detachment. He is describing something far more demanding and far more rewarding. A life of genuine emotional mastery, where you feel everything fully and choose your response deliberately. Here is what this looks like pulled into the present day. When a strong emotion arises, anger, fear, jealousy, grief, the first move is not to push it away or justify it. It is to name it, precisely and honestly. Not, I'm upset, but, I am afraid that this person does not respect me. Not, I'm stressed, but, I am angry because I feel like my effort is being ignored. Precision dissolves the emotional fog. It converts a weather system into something you can actually look at. The second move is the pause Musashi built his entire life around. The gap between stimulus and response. Even one breath. Even 3 seconds. In that gap, you are not suppressing anything. You are simply refusing to let the emotion move your body before your mind has had a moment to weigh in. The third move is the wide gaze. Step back from the immediate frame. What is actually at stake here? What do I actually know? What would be the wisest response? Not the most satisfying one, not the one that performs best for an audience, but the one that serves the actual situation in front of me. The fourth move, and this is where Musashi parts ways with most modern emotional wellness frameworks, is to go back and train. To deliberately seek out conditions that make you uncomfortable. Cold water. Difficult conversations you have been avoiding. Sitting with boredom without relief. Holding a position under pressure. Not because suffering is noble, but because you cannot build the capacity for emotional regulation in comfortable conditions. You build it in hard ones. The final word, the warrior who walks alone. The Dokkodo, the way of walking alone, ends with a precept so spare and uncompromising it almost stops time: never stray from the way. Musashi was not talking about a religious way, or a cultural way, or anyone else's way. He was talking about the path of relentless self-mastery that he had walked for nearly 6 decades. The path that began with a 13-year-old boy killing a man with a wooden staff and ended with an old swordsman dying alone in a mountain cave, entirely at peace. He had understood, finally and completely, something that the rest of us spend our whole lives circling without landing on: that the goal is not to have no enemies. The goal is to have no enemies inside yourself. To reach a state where the chaos outside cannot create chaos within. Where you are the calm center that everything spins around, rather than a leaf caught in someone else's storm. Controlling your emotions in Musashi's framework is not a coping strategy. It is not a way of dealing with a hard world. It is the entire project of becoming human in the fullest sense. A being who acts from clarity rather than from conditioning, who chooses rather than merely reacts, who brings something deliberate and conscious to every moment rather than something automatic and inherited. The sword was never the point. The sword was just the arena where these questions could not be avoided. You have your own arena. The question Musashi is asking you, the question he has been asking across 4 centuries, is the same one he asked himself every morning before he picked up a blade. Are you the one holding the sword? Or is the sword holding you?